All right, guys, I wanted to do people keep asking me, how did you get into Bitcoin? Why did you get into Bitcoin? And I think that's an important topic to discuss because I think there's a lot of people with a background not in Bitcoin considering Bitcoin and wondering whether it's a good investment or not, and wondering whether they should put some of their hard-earned energy and money into Bitcoin or not. And I wonder because there's a lot of things that you can do with your money. So why should you put it into Bitcoin? For me, I thought Bitcoin was a complete and utter scam in 2017. Not only a complete and utter scam, I wanted to profit from the stupid people that were into Bitcoin in 2017. I remember sitting in a cigar lounge, pretty similar to this one, but in London, with my best friend Deep, and us sitting there and buying a bunch of Bitcoin on our phones, on Coinbase, because we thought this is a parabolic run. We can make some money from this. We did that, and we ended up buying several Bitcoin and then selling it exactly a week later because the price had doubled. We were Fiat maximalists to a certain extent, and a lot of people are entering Bitcoin from that place. They are focused on the fiat of Bitcoin. They're focused on the returns. They're focused on the dollar returns of Bitcoin. They're not focused on what Bitcoin actually is. And then in 2020, when the big C word happened, I was actually in Colombia and I flew back to London. And then as I got to London, all the lockdowns started happening. And then as everything locked down, I was walking around a park. Every day for like 2 hours a day, just getting some exercise, getting some fresh air. And a friend of mine suggested Saifedean's The Bitcoin Standard. And I highly recommend that book to anyone. I highly recommend that book to this day. And I was listening to The Bitcoin Standard day one and everything was fine, and history of money and everything else, great. I understood that because I have a background in gold. And then the second day, as I'm walking around and I'm listening to this thing at like 2x the speed, he mentions stock to flow. Just the word stock to flow. Now, a lot of people are allergic to Bitcoin because of this stock to flow model that Plan B created. I'm not talking about that. He just mentioned the concept of stock to flow. And something triggered in me at that point because I had failed to understand Bitcoin from a stock to flow perspective and understand it and look at it from a commodities perspective. And so as he mentioned stock to flow at 2x the speed, I had to stop walking, pause it, rewind it, slow the speed down, and listen to that whole section in normal speed. I remember literally stopping as he explained stock to flow, all of the puzzle pieces sort of getting into place, and suddenly realizing I had fucked up. And so that very second, I downloaded the Coinbase app on my phone, opened up my account again, signed in, and bought 10,000 pounds worth of Bitcoin immediately. As I'm walking home, I added that and added several more thousands of pounds worth of Bitcoin as I'm walking home from the park. And within 3 months, I had moved 30 to 35% of my net worth into Bitcoin. And then by November of 2020, I'd sold all of my gold holdings and put them into Bitcoin. Now, a lot of people get confused because a lot of the information around Bitcoin is you got to be 100% in Bitcoin. All this. I'm not that type of person. My wealth doesn't come from Bitcoin. My wealth comes from a background in real estate, stock market, equities, gold, and all of that, all of those traditional assets. I still have a large portion of my net worth, at least in dollar terms, in different things. I also collect watches and things like that. So I don't believe anyone needs to put 100%, and I don't believe anyone with a significant amount of wealth can afford to put 100% of their wealth into Bitcoin. I just don't think that's a reality for most people. Now, saying that, what I understood about Bitcoin that day, that very second when he mentioned stock to flow, is that Bitcoin is the single hardest asset on earth. It's the single hardest asset on earth with programmable predictability on what its availability will be. There is no other asset in human history that has that. Gold, everyone says gold is extremely limited. It's limited because of its price action. the demand of gold impacts the supply of gold, and therefore the supply of gold impacts the demand of gold, and they have this relationship. Bitcoin is the only asset in human history where the demand cannot affect the supply. That has never ever been created, ever. It is a perfect asset from a demand and supply perspective. We've got to get past assets that you can just inflate and print based on the price of them. We've got to get over that. For example, right? Rolex makes 1 million pieces a year, and everyone thinks Rolex watches are highly in demand. They're highly in demand for a short period of time, and then they blow up, and then the prices crash, and then now certain pieces that were above market are now below market, below retail. Whereas Bitcoin, if $1 trillion wants to go into Bitcoin in the next month, the board at Bitcoin can't turn around and say, you know what, we should produce some more Bitcoin. There is a certain amount coming out every single day, every single 10 minutes. And that's extremely important for people to understand. And it was important for me to understand, because if you understand the system that we live in, which is an inflationary system, everything has to inflate because in dollar value, because we live in an inflationary system. Dollars will be printed. There is no going back on this. You're either going to go through it very slowly or you're going to go through it very fast. If you look at the Egyptian pound, they're going through it really fast. The US will be the best alternative of all the fiat bullshit. And what you need as an investor, and the reason why you got into property, the reason why you got into stocks, the reason why you got into watches, the reason why you got into anything is because of its scarcity. Whether you know that or not, you got into it because of its scarcity. The reason why, if you could, snap your fingers and have a bunch of new apartment buildings go up as and when demand increased, the price of property wouldn't go up. The price of property is very much linked to its demand, just like any other asset. But with Bitcoin, no matter what the demand, the supply cannot change. That's extremely important. And that's why stock to flow is very, very important. For anyone who doesn't understand stock to flow, I know I said it a couple of times, I thought I'd better actually explain what it is. All it is measuring the yearly flow, the yearly new flow of that asset based on the amount that's already on the surface of the earth. And the longer it takes in new flow to replace what's already on the surface of the earth, the harder the asset is. That's where it's hard money. That's where that comes from. Hardness of the asset is very important. And us as humans, we tend to gravitate towards the hardest asset. So when Saifedean started talking about stock to flow, it just opened something inside of me that was sitting there, but hadn't figured this out. I hadn't figured out that stock to flow is extremely important for Bitcoin. And that was my understanding, and that was my starting point in 2020 to actually figuring out Bitcoin. Now for me, I was lucky enough to be in a position where I could just jump in because of my background of experience and then figure it out later, right? I didn't have to understand Bitcoin to the nth degree in order to just jump in. And this is what I say to people that I speak to that have, say, $1 million portfolio or $1 million in net worth. It's like, at this point, you can buy one Bitcoin, and currently the price is something like $22,000, and it's 2.2% of your portfolio. Even if Bitcoin goes to zero, and that 2.2% goes to zero, the compounded growth on the rest of your portfolio is going to make up for that. So you cannot do that and watch Bitcoin go to $5-10 million a coin over the next couple decades. And that is really the question that people with assets have to answer. Now, people without assets, you need to look at it and go, what am I storing my energy in? And that's where you need to start understanding these concepts around investing, like stock to flow. If you're completely new to investing, you need to realize that investing should actually be called saving. There should be a step before investing. It's called saving. Saving is where you exchange your energy for currency and then save it in something. You save your energy in something. And then Bitcoin starts becoming a battery. That's what everything is. Everything is a battery. Real estate is a battery for most people. Stocks are a battery for most people. Watches are a battery for people. Cigars are even a battery for people, right? And so you need to understand, what battery are you putting your hard-earned energy into? And then is that battery hard enough to sustain that energy over a long period of time? And then when it is, you can then carry forward all of your efforts from today. You can't just be subject to people turning around and saying, you know what, no, we feel like we need some more liquidity today, so we're going to press a button and fuck everyone by just printing a bunch of money. So stock to flow is extremely important as a philosophy to understand, and that's what it did for me. That was that one moment that set me on my path and put all the puzzle pieces together for understanding Bitcoin for me. And then ultimately I just realized that there's 3 rules to Bitcoin. By the way, as there are these 3 rules that everyone likes to repeat, you can be as bullish as fuck as you want on Bitcoin, but the 3 rules of Bitcoin are pretty much the same for any asset in an inflationary system. The difference is Bitcoin is a growing asset in an inflationary system. And so the 3 rules are buy Bitcoin, shut the fuck up, and you get fabulously wealthy. But that's my story of how I discovered Bitcoin and how all the puzzle pieces clicked together for me.